Hi, I'm Glyn Dewis and welcome to episode 7 of my video podcast. Okay, so for this week, what I thought I'd do is mainly do some Photoshop techniques. And to start off, I thought I'd just go through one of the techniques that I've used on this picture here of this Aston Martin. Now, this is a picture that I photographed this past weekend. It's a friend of mine's car, and it also just happens that where we photographed it on this disused airfield was also a friend of mine. So when you've got somebody that owns an Aston and somebody that owns a disused airfield, it's just screaming out for a photo shoot. But what I want to do is go through just one of the techniques I've used, is because I had a couple of questions since I posted it up online on my social media and on my website, was about how I've done the lighting and all this kind of stuff. But this is kind of like a work in progress. This isn't the finished picture. This is probably around about 15 minutes or so in Lightroom and then just a little bit in Photoshop. But there are much more things that I want to do to this before it's finally finished. But just to give you an idea, if you haven't seen any of the posts I've put on Facebook and on my other social media sites and my website this week, the out of camera shot is this one here. Now, I'm not somebody who generally shoots HDR, but because it just so happens on the day when we wanted clouds, we didn't have any and we had majorly bright sun. I kind of photographed my friend's car using several exposures. So I was kind of working in the realms of going for a HDR shot. But I ended up actually using just one of those exposures and working in Lightroom to come up with this here. Then I went into Photoshop and added in the clouds. So what I want to do is just show you how you can add in clouds very quickly and very easily in Photoshop. So if we just head over to Photoshop, here you can see the picture. Obviously I've cropped it down just a little bit in Lightroom because that's the kind of the look that I wanted for the picture. But this is basically as it is following the retouching steps in Lightroom. So now I've brought it into Photoshop. I've kind of blurred out the registration number for obvious kind of reasons, but I want to add in some clouds now. So this is how we do it. So what I'm going to do is I've got my background layer here, which is my my car image, and I'm going to file and place. Now I'm not going to go to file and open because I'm trying to kind of think of my workflow and speeding things up here and working non-destructively. If I use file then place, I then look on my hard drive for any kind of shots of clouds that I've got stored on there, which I tend to do quite a lot. And I've chosen one of these shots here of clouds, and then I click place in the bottom right. Rather than opening up the clouds layer as a completely separate file, it opens it up directly into the image that I've got open. So it's now at the top of the layer stack. And the great thing is, it comes in with these free transform handles on it, places it directly in the middle, and I can just literally just hold down my shift and my option key, and I can kind of stretch it out so it fills the frame. In fact, we just need a little bit more on the right hand side just there. Another great thing about using the file and place command is that when it comes into Photoshop, it comes in as a smart object. And if you've seen any of my other videos, you'll know how much of a fan I am of using smart objects now and how important they are when you're trying to work non-destructively. So now that I've got my clouds in the picture, I need to drag them up just a little bit. So if I just turn them off, obviously I only want clouds in the top part here. Down the bottom part here we don't need. So I'm going to kind of like drag the clouds up and then mask off any bits that I don't need. So let's turn on the clouds layer, but just so I can see exactly how far I need to move them up, I'm going to lower the opacity down on the clouds just so I can see the background image, which is the one of my car, just coming through like this. I'm then going to get my move tool. I'm going to hold down the shift key at the same time and click down on the picture and drag up. And when I do that, what that actually allows me to do is move the clouds layer up in a straight line. If I wasn't holding down my shift key and I didn't go directly upwards, it could go off to the left, it could go off to the right and what have you. But I wanted to go straight up, so holding down my shift key allows me to do it. Now, another reason that I've gone for using opacity is that if we look how far I want these clouds to come up, I can see the underneath, the background layer here. And in the distance, we've got these tree line. I obviously don't want the bottom of my clouds layer, which contains grass and the meadow area. I don't want it to go above. So I'm just going to do this so they go just underneath the tree line in the car photo. So somewhere about there. So that's far enough up. I'm then going to bring the opacity up to 100%, and then I'm going to add a layer mask, and I'm going to use a gradient, and I'm going to use a black foreground colour because I want to use black to conceal the lower part of the cloud layer, which is this grass and the trees and all this kind of stuff. You can see at the bottom here. And if you've used layer mask before, there's a concept which, like a phrase that I know, which is white reveals, black conceals. I've no idea where I heard that from, but it kind of helps when you're trying to understand what layer masks do. So white reveals, black conceals. And I'm going to use a black foreground colour. And now that my foreground colour is black, I'm going to choose at the top of the screen here, we've got options. I'm in the gradient tool, and when I do that, I can now choose what kind of a gradient I want. And all I'm going to go for is the one that I use probably 99.9% of the times, and that's the foreground to transparent, which is the second one across. So I'll click on that, click OK, then come back into my image, and I'm just going to put my cursor on the road area at the bottom part of the picture, maybe around about the middle area of that. Click, hold down my shift key, click, and drag up to get a straight line, and I'll probably go halfway into the clouds, something like so, and then let go. And you can see that already now it starts to blend in, quite naturally looking, the clouds with the picture of the car. There's a few areas that need to be tidied up, and in fact I think we can probably add just another gradient there just to add a little bit more, or sorry, take a little bit more away. So we'll go up and like so. Now, there are a few areas that we need to sort out here. Now, obviously there's clouds all over the car, and because we've got a layer mask attached to our clouds layer, what I could do is just get a black brush. My foreground's black, I've got a nice soft brush, and I could come in and physically paint it away off the car. And that's going to be really easy in the areas that are in the lower part of the car, where to the side of them we've just got this kind of like background area here with the trees and the grass. But if I go too far up onto the sky area, you can see it's going to be very tricky for me to work and get nice and tight so I don't get these areas missing like so. That's not going to be good. So what I did to help me out before I started recording this and before I added in the clouds, what I did was I made a selection of my car, and I saved that selection for use when I've actually got the clouds in the picture. Now you can use whatever selection method you want, but the one that I found that works the best, and it's one that I tend to use the most nowadays because I just find it is just so much more accurate when you're using it, and it's the pen tool. The reason I use the pen tool was because initially I used the quick selection tool, and obviously when Photoshop's using any of the selection tools, it kind of works on contrast. Now, that's all well and good in this bottom part here, but in the top part of the roof line, just going across here, where the sky and the roof of the car, you're going to get a reflection of the sky in the roof of the car, and where that is, it kind of reduces the contrast. So to try and Photoshop to try and separate what's the roof and what the sky is quite challenging. So it didn't really work too well using the quick selection tool. So I found using the pen tool was a lot quicker. So that's what I did. I made a selection of it, and then I've saved it. I also did one of the windows, and I'll explain why in a moment. So let's just turn back on the clouds. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I'm actually active on the layer mask. So you can see there's like bounding handles around the layer mask. So whatever I do now is working directly on that layer mask. So now that I'm on there, I'm going to go to select and load selection, and I'm going to find the selection that I made and I saved of the car. Now to make it nice and easy, I called that selection car. So click on the selection that I made and click OK, and you'll see when I do that we get these marching ants. So that kind of shows you the selection that I made. So I don't want any of the clouds to appear on the car. So we know white reveals, black conceals. So I'm going to conceal the clouds that are showing up on the car. So all I shall do is I shall go to the edit menu, choose fill, and from here I'm going to, where it says contents, I'm going to use black and click OK. So now we can't see the clouds in the car. So that's great. So we'll deselect, get rid of the marching ants. So that's looking good. But if I turn the clouds on and off, you can see there are areas especially obvious on this side here. If I turn that on and off, you can see there's some of the cloud layers still showing up there. So to get rid of that, all I did was I then used a brush at around about 50% opacity, a really soft brush, nice and soft. And I just came in very carefully and just painted that off just a little bit to help it kind of blend in to those areas just there in the background. Something like that looks good. hold down my space bar and move across, turn the clouds on and off. I can see that, yeah, just a little bit is spilling onto the distant hills over here. So I can use the same brush, 50% opacity, just to help it blend in just nice and naturally, something like that. Now if I go too far over, I can just flip to use the white colour here, the opposite, and I'll just paint that back in, something like that, or whatever. Let's just go back just a little bit. So you can see how you can blend it in. So that looks great. That's really starting to look fairly natural. But obviously, where the car is, it's quite bright on the floor. The car is quite bright. The clouds, for me, I don't know what you think, but for me, they just seem just a little bit too dark and don't really match in with the lighting. So now I'm using Photoshop CC. So I've got the option now of using the Camera Raw as a filter. And you remember, because I brought this in as a smart object, then that's going to give me the flexibility of making adjustments to the layer that I'm working on non-destructively. So what I'm going to do is you can see we've got this smart object, which is our clouds layer. I'm going to go to the filter menu and I'm going to choose, in fact, I've got to make sure that I'm actually working on the thumbnail of the clouds, because that's what I want to go into Camera Raw. I'm now going to go to filter and choose Camera Raw filter. And in here, all I need to do is just make some very, very quick adjustments just to brighten the clouds up so they kind of match in more with what the lighting is on the car. So I'm going to drag up the exposure. The great thing is, even if I don't get this quite right now, because it's a smart object and been converted to for smart filters, I can just double click and come back here and just finesse it so that it does match in. So that's the real brilliant advantage of using smart objects. So I'll increase the exposure. And I'll probably bring up the shadows just a little bit. And clouds, they love clarity. So let's bring up the clarity as well, something like that. Not too much, but probably around about there. And we'll just click OK. So you'll see now that Camera Raw then throws it back into the picture. And now the clouds, it kind of makes, yeah, that kind of looks much, much more realistic for the picture to sort of like pass off as being, that's how it was in camera. Okay, so that's the clouds put in. Now it's the attention to detail that will take your retouching to the next level. Now you may have found that in the original picture, there's things that I did like adding in the reflections of the clouds on the bodywork and all that kind of stuff. It's that kind of attention to detail that helps you to sell the fake, so people don't say, oh, that wasn't real. So I'll show you at some point maybe how I did those clouds, but I'm also thinking about doing a full-length downloadable tutorial of this finished picture. So if you do want to see that, I'd really appreciate it if you kind of want to see that once it's done. Let me know in the comments section on YouTube here, or even on my website, that you think that would make a good tutorial. So yeah, there's lots more that's been done. But what I want to show you now is the window here, because you can see clearly now it doesn't really match in, because we've got all these clouds in the sky. We would see those clouds just a little bit in the windows. Now the windows have got a little bit of a tint to them, so they wouldn't be quite so obvious as what we can see kind of like in this area, but we would see some of the clouds in the window. Now, like I made a selection of the car, I also made a selection of this part of the window. So what I shall do is I'm going to click on the layer mask, and then I'm going to load in that selection that I saved of the windows, and I called it Windows. Typical Virgo, everything being labelled and organised. And we'll click OK. So now you can see these marching ants, which shows the selection I made of the windows. Now going back to that saying, white reveals, black conceals. I want to reveal the clouds in the window. The reason I need to do this is to make it look much more realistic. So I'm going to go to the edit menu, choose fill, and this time I'm choosing white because I want to reveal the clouds, and I'll click OK. So that's all well and good, but it still doesn't look realistic, because look, here we've got, there's where we were doing this photo shoot, just above us there was these power lines, and you can see the reflection of these power lines showing up in the window here. But now that I've kind of like filled in this area to add the clouds into the windows, that's completely covered it over. So it's kind of like taken the shine out the window. So what I can now do to help with the realism, now that I've just literally filled that in with that white colour to show the clouds, I can now go to the edit and use the fade command. Now this fade command is brilliant. It basically will allow you to control the opacity of anything that you've just done. I've just filled this in with white to reveal the clouds. So now I can use the fade command to control the strength, if you like, of that white. So I'm going to bring it across to the left, bringing it across all the way to around about 35%, 36% will do for me, because what that's going to allow now is you can start to see this reflection of those power cables coming in, but you can also see the traces of some of the clouds, because I've only reduced the whole effect down to 35%, and click OK. Now, one little thing with that fade command, which again you find in the edit menu, if I'd have just filled the window with white and then I pressed another key and then I went to choose the edit and fade command, it wouldn't be there. So if ever you want to use the fade command, do what it is you want to do nothing else, and then go and choose it. Because if you press any key, if you do anything, you won't find the fade command there. I hope that makes sense. So there we go. So I've got the reflection of these power cables coming through here, but I still want to make the clouds maybe. I think I want the clouds to be a little bit more obvious. So I remember what I did at this point was I added a blank layer and I got my clone stamp tool, and I didn't clone stamp at full 100% of the strength. I took it down to maybe 30 or 40%. And what I did was I chose an area where there's some dark clouds and white clouds that's pretty obvious. And I just sampled that area, and then I came into the window and painted it in just in portions of the window like so. So I'll choose this area here, paint this into this bit, and I'll choose one last bit for this back window just here, like so. Now the reason I kept the marching ants was so that when I was sampling the clouds and painting it within the window, it would only keep it within the window. Even if I came outside, it wouldn't make it go out there. So it all keeps everything that I do within the bounding box, within these marching ants. So now let's just deselect. And you can see when I turn that layer on and off, hopefully you can see this on your screen, you can see some of the clouds coming through. And because it's on its own layer, if you think that's too strong, you can lower the opacity. But if you want to make it a little bit more obvious, I think maybe you could add something like a levels adjustment, and you could bring up the highlights and bring down the midtones just to make them stand out just a little bit more. But you've got to be careful not to have too much contrast in there, because these windows would have a little bit of a tint, so you wouldn't see the clouds quite so obvious as you would with like the naked eye and looking up into the sky, something like that. And click OK. So then what I'll do is I'll put these two layers that contain the clouds into a group, and we'll rename that group there, new group, I'll call it Clouds. Click OK, and you can just zoom out by pressing the hand tool here twice to make it to full screen, and very quickly just turn it on and off. Let's just put these two layers into the group like so. Close the group and turn that layer on and off. You can see how very, very quickly we can add in some clouds. Maybe I'd use the brush down here just to take a little bit of it off this distant area with the tree line, but that just to show you how quickly you can add in some clouds should you need to. Hey folks, I just want to take a minute of your time just to let you know about a brand new workshop I've got coming out in September of this year, 2013. It's on Saturday the 21st and Sunday the 22nd of September. And like I say, it's a 2-day workshop I'm calling my Dynamic Duo Knockout. Now, this workshop's been held up in Halifax in the UK, and like I say, it's 2 parts to it. The first day we're going to be on location at the Halifax Boxing Club, photographing professional boxers in all kinds of environments and all kinds of scenes. So we're going to be photographing staged fight shots, some real kind of dramatic portrait shots, physique shots, and all that kind of stuff. So that's day 1, where we'll take you through the whole lighting setup, from scouting your location to setting every single thing up. And I'm going to be joined by my good friend Kieran Nevison, so to make sure that the day is just packed full of teaching, learning and shooting. So that's day 1. On the evening of day 1, we're also going to have some social time where we're going to be out having drinks and food, and then on Sunday is retouching day. Now you might wonder, what kind of level do you need to be at this? Well, my brand new workflow, this non-destructive workflow, you're going to love, because this really does take advantage of the power of Lightroom if you use Lightroom, but if not, Camera Raw. Now, all the images that you'll have seen lately of my kickboxers, the boxers themselves, some physique work, and the pictures that you can see on the poster when you go to my website here, I would say maybe 80% of the work has been done within Lightroom or Camera Raw. So I don't care if you've just started using Photoshop, I'm going to be able to show you how you can quickly and easily work to produce these kind of images in your own workflow, and on top of that, non-destructively, meaning that if you want to change something later, you're going to be able to do that really, really easily. So that's Saturday the 21st, Sunday the 22nd of September 2013 in Halifax, UK. Go to my website, which is glindewis.com, and you'll see the link either at the top where it says workshops, or on the right hand side it says dynamic duo. It's £249 per person. That's for both days, including light lunch and snacks throughout the whole day, and transport to and from your hotel as well. Look forward to seeing you there. Okay, so to finish off, what I want to do is just to carry on from a video that I recorded last week and I posted up on my YouTube page. And that video is called The Power of Smart Objects. And in that video, which is only a few minutes long, 8 minutes long, I'll show you how you can kind of trick Photoshop into thinking it's working with a smaller file size, so that it kind of helps a little bit with the processing power. But the main advantage of that particular video is to show you how you can use smart objects to keep all the layers that you have in your retouching, and you're working completely non-destructively. Now, one of the questions I had following on from that was, when you've nested all of your layers into a smart object, how on earth do you get to see them again? Because this is what I've got. Originally, I'm working on my picture. I've got all these layers here. I then clicked on the top layer, shift clicked to contain all the layers here, and then I converted all of those into one single smart object. So they're all selected, and I went to the flyout menu at the top of the layers panel and chose convert to smart object. And of course, when I do that, it converts it to a smart object, so it becomes one layer. So how do you find all those layers within there? Well, all you do is quite simply just double click on the thumbnail in the layers panel. When you do that, Photoshop then opens up all the layers that you originally had in your image. So it's a completely non-destructive way of working. But one thing I want to quickly show you now is a bit of a workaround for those of you who aren't on the Creative Cloud. So you don't have access to something like, say, the Camera Raw filter. So how on earth can people who aren't using the Creative Cloud, how can they take a layer into Camera Raw and continue editing in their picture? Now, this isn't the perfect solution, but it is a solution. Well, in fact, there's two solutions, if you like. The first one I'm going to show you or give you an idea about is one that you may have heard mentioned before, and it's a script that you can install in Photoshop by a guy called Russell Brown. So if you go to a website called russellbrown.com, and when you go to it, you've got this, with the icon on the right-hand side, it Dr. Brown's Scripts. And when you click on that, just scroll down, and way down the bottom, you'll find one of these scripts that he's got called Edit Layers in Adobe Camera Raw. Now on here now you'll only see the CS6 version. There is the CS5 version if you scroll way down the bottom where it's in the archives. But basically this is a script that allows you to do kind of similar to what the update does in Creative Cloud, where you can take a layer into Camera Raw, but it does have its restrictions. I mean, for example, you can't use it on a layer that contains a layer mask, but it is a pretty good workaround. If you don't want to install that, or if you don't know how to, or maybe you're on an even older version of Photoshop than maybe CS5, here's what you can do. So here's our image that we're working on. Here's all our layers. We want to keep all those layers. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Image and Duplicate, and that creates an identical copy of what we've got on screen now. And I'm going to call that Duplicate. Duplicate, I-C-A-T-E, and click OK. Once I've got that duplicate now, I'm going to flatten all the layers. So we'll go to Flatten Image. Then I'm going to go to File, Save As, and it's called Duplicate, and I'll just put it onto the into a little folder. and I'll click save, like so, and then I'll close it. So here now is my original image. I've saved the flattened version, which is a duplicate, out onto my desktop. What I'm going to do now is go to File, Open, and I'm going to find that duplicate that I actually saved on my computer. So here it is here, duplicate. And now before I click Open, what I'm going to do is where it says Enable and Format, in the format I'm going to choose Camera Raw. Now Camera Raw ordinarily only opens up RAW files. But we can kind of override that and tell Photoshop, look, no matter what this is, open it up in Camera Raw. And we do that by choosing Camera Raw and then clicking Open. So now that flattened duplicate layer has been forced into Camera Raw. So now I can take advantage of all the things that are in Camera Raw, clarity and all that kind of stuff. And I'll click Open Image. So now it brings it up into Photoshop in its own layer. I'm then going to go to Select All to get the marching ants all around it, Edit and Copy. Then I'm going to go back to my original image with all the layers in, and I'm going to go to Edit and Paste. So what it does, it now puts that duplicate layer that we created, that merged, flattened duplicate layer that we've just played around with in Camera Raw to take advantage of the sliders in there. It's then allowed us to then place it at the very, very top of our layer stack. And the great thing here is we can now control the opacity to control how much of what we've done with that particular layer in Camera Raw shows through. So it's kind of a workaround. The only bigger disadvantage of that is that this is working non-destructively, because now any retouching I do on top of this layer means that this layer here, it kind of like creates a full stop, a point that I can no longer go past. So now if I wanted to change anything down in this part of the image, I'd have to undo everything I've done beyond this point and redo it all again. So it's kind of like a bit of give and take. It's a kind of a workaround, but it's not an ideal workaround. Now, I don't get any advantages by telling you about CC and the advantage of using the Camera Raw filter, but maybe that's kind of like an illustration as to why you're probably hearing people say how much of a big deal it is to have the Camera Raw as a filter. It really does help us to work non-destructively. Okay, so thanks for watching this episode. Don't forget, if you've got any questions, any comments, by all means just drop me a line to glyn@glyndewis.com, and if there's any tips, tricks or techniques that you want to see in future episodes, again just drop me a line and I'll see what I can do. Don't forget, if you haven't already, just down here we've got the subscribe button. Click on that. You'll never miss an episode of this podcast and any other videos that I've put out as well. Okay, I shall see you next week.